You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
We're firstly going to be speaking to Gillian in the studio, so welcome along to the show.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks very much for inviting me.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the CCG firstly.
Sure. We've been running for about a year now, but only officially for about 6 weeks. We're Swale Clinical Commissioning Group, and some people will have heard over the last year or so lots of publicity about complete changes in the NHS, primary care trusts closing, new organisations coming in. And the Clinical Commissioning Group for Swale is one of those new organisations. We're comprised mainly of GPs who are now taking decisions about and planning what is really best for patients in the sheppey, Sheerness, Sittingbourne and Tenham area to make sure that health services, whether that's your local hospital, whether it's walk-in centres, whether it's community services, mental health services, are really doing the best they should be doing to meet the needs of patients across the area that we cover. So that's a bit about us to start with.
And Gillian, I was wondering, what do you actually do?
That's a really good question, Daniel. Thank you. Because what I'll do is talk a bit about what we do, but also what we don't do. What we do is to decide on the best services for patients across Sheerness and also Sittingbourne and Tenham. And those services include things like emergency care, so things like Medway Hospital, minor injuries units here in Sheerness, planned hospital care, community health services, so if you have a health visitor coming out to see you, often that service might be commissioned by our clinical commissioning group. And other services, we also order things like maternity and newborn services, children's services, mental health services, services for people with learning disabilities, and also medicines prescribed to GPs. So quite a wide range of things that we do look at. What we're very keen to do as a new organisation is to make sure when we're making those decisions, we know what patients and the public really think about the services they're receiving. We are really glad when things go well, and we love to hear from patients and public when things do go well. But sometimes things don't work quite as well as they could do, and in that case we'd also like to hear from people, and perhaps I can give some contact details at the end, because that helps us to know when we're talking to service providers, perhaps make suggestions about what things they could do slightly differently, and make sure that we really know what's happening well and what isn't. There's a few things that we don't do that perhaps it's worth me mentioning here.
Yeah.
And one of the things, it might seem slightly odd to people because we're led by GPs, but one of the things that we don't commission are actually GP services. That's commissioned by a national body called NHS England. And the reason for that is that, I suppose with anything, if you've got people in the driving seat, it wouldn't be right for them to make decisions about their own salaries and services. So the NHS has split out the services that we commission and lead, like the hospital and community services that I've mentioned earlier, and then completely separately, a separate body called NHS England actually make decisions to make sure that GPs services and surgeries are commissioned in the best way possible for patients.
And I was wondering next, how are you run?
Okay, well, quite a difference from how the NHS used to be run. Here locally, we've got GPs running the commissioning group who run surgeries as part of their day job, either in Sittingbourne or Tenham or on the Isle of Sheppey. And because they know and they see patients day in, day out, and they're also able to find out what's happening elsewhere, they've got a really good insight into what patients need, what's working well and what isn't. And that's really the main thinking behind clinical commissioning groups. By putting GPs in the driving seat and giving them the power to decide what services are best for the patients in the area, it's one good way of making sure that the right services, the right health services are commissioned in the right way. GPs obviously have excellent medical knowledge, but they're also seeing patients all the time, and that's a really good way of making sure that the right decisions are made for people in the area. We receive our money from an organisation called NHS England. This year we received 120 million. Sounds an awful lot of money, but if you divide it out amongst our population, that's just over £1,000 per year for everybody. When I first heard that figure, I thought, gosh, that's a lot of money. But actually, if you think that one hip operation is about £6,000, the money goes incredibly quickly. So we've got a budget, but we're going to have to plan it really carefully. And that's one of the things we want to talk to patients and public about. We had a first meeting since officially coming into play last month in May, to talk to patients and voluntary organisations to say, what do you think your priorities should be? Because although we're only in May of 2013, we're already having to think about what our priorities should be next year in 2014. And so I think in terms of how we run, there's two main things that are different from perhaps previous NHS bodies. One is that we're led by GPs and we're very local, we're very locally focused, but also we're doing much more to listen to patients and public when we're actually making those key decisions about what's really best for people in the area.
So what is the difference, Gillian?
I think it's because I think the main difference is that we are much more locally focused. Previous to the 1st of April this year, there was a large organisation doing a pretty good job, but having an enormous task. They were trying to make decisions for the whole of Kenton Medway. So whether you were sitting in Sheerness or Tunbridge Wells or Folkestone, wherever it was, the Kenton Medway Primary Care Trust was trying to make the best decision for patients. Just by nature of being such a big organisation, it was very difficult to really look locally and decide what was best and really get in that local know-how from patients about what was working well and what wasn't. And I think we've got a real advantage now as a local organisation. We can make decisions using the expertise of GPs who are already on the ground in the area, who really know what works well and what doesn't work well. Not just from reports they see, but actually by really knowing what's happening on the ground. But also we can be much more proactive in being closely in touch with patients and public. So as an organisation before, trying to cover the whole of Kenton Medway, the PCT would often try and talk to patients, but actually if you're trying to do that over a massive area, it's very difficult. We want to really be very different in terms of what we're doing. That is in listening to patients and public, but also working much more closely with the voluntary and community sector, because we can play our part as a CCG, and I think we've already made some really good changes in terms of what we're trying to do, trying to join up services better for patients, but we're also really excited about the potential of working much more closely with the voluntary community sector, because there are many excellent pieces of work that happen in that sector that we could work well together on. That perhaps hasn't happened so much in the past.
Well, I know next you wanted to cover local focus.
Sure, yeah, thanks Daniel. I wanted to talk, I've mentioned a bit about the importance of patients and public and some different ways about getting involved really with the CCG. The CCG is there for patients and public in Swale, and do please use it, both for feedback, positive and negative. But one of the things that we've really picked up over the last 6 weeks, and when we first started as a shadow organisation a year ago, is just how important carers are across the island and elsewhere. And it's absolutely vital that carers get the right support. And I'm talking about family carers in the main, but other carers as well, to make sure that they can look after their loved ones and also that they can look after themselves as well. So I wanted to talk a bit about an organisation that we're working with. I mentioned earlier how important the voluntary sector is, and there's an organisation called Carer Support, which is now working with adult carers across the whole of Swale and other areas as well, and they provide an absolutely essential service to carers. We know as a clinical commissioning board that whilst we can do our piece in terms of making sure that health services are as good as they can be, it's often better for people to be able to stay in their own homes for as long as possible, particularly if they're not feeling particularly well. And it's carers that make that all possible, but carers themselves need some support as well. So there is an organisation now that provides different types of services and support for carers, whether that's emotional support, whether that's one-to-one support, whether it's advice with benefits, it might be training, it might be education, it might be respite. Carers often work 24/7, and if they can just get a short break, sometimes then they come back to looking after their family members much more refreshed and in much better spirits. So it's really important that carers are well supported, and I'm really welcoming the fact that we are now working quite closely with an organisation called Carer Support. Perhaps I'll give their contact number at the end of this today, because they're an absolutely essential service for carers, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people out there who are already carers and know they're carers, but a lot of people think, oh, I'm just helping a bit at home, and actually don't realise that they are carers themselves as well. So if you're caring for somebody, then this organisation, Carer Support, is absolutely essential for you, whatever your needs might be.
Now, I know you also wanted to cover the importance of patients getting involved, and also how they can get involved as well.
Yes, thanks very much. Every one of the surgeries, we've got about 20 surgeries across the area, and each one of those has got a patient participation group, and that's where patients can attend meetings every couple of weeks or so, fairly informal, but just to give feedback on two things really. One, to give feedback to practice managers and their GPs about what's working well and not so well at the surgery itself, but also to let people know about other services, so to let your GP know if you've had either a positive or a negative experience. It might be at the hospital, it might be a community care team that's come to visit and support you, or somebody you're looking after. It might be mental health services, because that's the kind of information that helps us to make sure that we're on top of what's happening and what's working well across Swale. So there's patient participation groups if going to your surgery meeting every couple of months is something that you're able to do. But we've also got a Swale network, and if you're interested in getting involved in the CCG, want to hear regularly about what it's doing, but also want to feed in some of your experiences via the website, there's a really excellent network called the Swale Network, and that is there specifically for people who want to find out what's happening with the CCG, but also give their own feedback about health services in the area. And I'd really encourage people to sign up and get involved. It doesn't take much time. It suits lots of people who might be very busy, who just don't have time to get to meetings at their local surgery, and it's a very easy way of staying in touch with what the CCG is doing.
And I know you wanted to cover next when to use and not to use A&E.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thanks very much. There's been so much publicity in the last couple of weeks about accident and emergency and what to do about it, and the fact that it gets too busy. And actually, there's lots of alternatives to A&E in the right situation. A&E is an excellent service, and our nearest one is at Medway, but it is really for life-threatening emergencies and serious illnesses, and most people use it for that, for life-threatening emergencies and when things are really serious. But sometimes people also use it for things which aren't quite so serious, where some services and support much more locally would be better for them, and also make sure that A&E is freed up for the things that really are serious and life-threatening. So, for example, if you've got something and you're slightly concerned about it, actually pharmacists are trained to provide a range of support and advice. So it might be that you're slightly concerned about something, it might be a fairly simple ailment, not quite sure what to do about it. Quite often pharmacists will see people, quite often they've got a private room to talk to people if that's going to be more appropriate, but they do often provide excellent support and advice. The other things we've got here, just down the road here at Minster, but also in Sittingbourne, is the minor injuries unit. Now, if you've got something, or if I've got something like a sprain, a strain, broken bones, wound infections, minor head injuries or insect or animal bites, quite often your minor injuries unit is much better than actually going to accident and emergency. Minor injuries units are there. We've got one very locally here, as I say, in Minster, but also in Sittingbourne, and they can deal with people really quickly, and often much more quickly than actually going all the way to accident and emergency. There's another facility also at Sheppey Community Hospital, which is DMC. It's a walk-in centre, and you can go in there and get advice. If you can't wait to see your GP, let's say you phoned your GP and he can't see you or she can't see you till the next day, but you really feel you need to see somebody urgently. So again, that's another option, which is much closer than accident and emergency and is much better for those things which aren't really life-threatening and urgent or very serious. And last but not least, of course, there's the phone. An NHS 111 is now free and it's up and running fully now. I'm glad to say that it is a success locally, and it's running alongside NHS Direct, and together they provide excellent advice over the phone. So it might be that you've got something that you think, well, I'm not sure whether this is serious or not, I need some quick over the phone advice. You can ring this number, there's a GP at the end of the line, and they can tell you whether it is urgent, whether you need to go to A&E, whether somebody can come out and treat you, or whether it's better to go to one of the other places that I've just mentioned, like the walk-in centre or the minor injuries. So there are a range of things that are useful for people and often much better than A&E in terms of places to go to if you're feeling that you're not feeling quite right, but it's not actually life-threatening or extremely serious.
Gillian, before you go, was there anything else you would like to cover? And I was just wondering if you could go over some of those useful contact details of some of the things you've mentioned during the interview.
Sure, thank you, Daniel. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention before I go. One is that we have a patient reference group which brings together all the feedback from all the different surgeries and the voluntary sector across the area, and we're particularly looking for volunteers, whether you're a patient, member of the public, running a voluntary organisation from the Isle of Sheppey area. So if you are interested in getting involved, I'd love to hear from people. It meets about once every 2 months for a couple of hours, usually during the day, and it's all about trying to get patient feedback from individuals so that the CCG can start planning for next year, but also make sure that services are happening as they should do this year. Contact details for that patient reference group. If you can contact me, I'm Gillian Wells, and the email address is ccg@nhs.net. That's ccg@nhs.net. I also mentioned for those who would be happy to sign up for the Swale Health Network earlier, that's the virtual network for people who want to just stay in touch with what the CCG is doing, but also feed in their experiences of health. And that's the same email address, ccg@nhs.net. 2 more to go on terms of contacts. One is anything general about CCG. We have a website, www.swaleccg.nhs.uk. And lastly, we talked a lot about carers earlier. We really do feel it's important either for existing carers or for new carers to get the right support that they need. And so I've got the contact details for the organisation providing support for people in Swale, and that's Carers Support. I mentioned them briefly earlier, and they've got a phone number. If I give that out, that's 01233 664 393. That number again, 01233 664 393.
Gillian, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along this evening and telling us all about the Swale Clinical Commissioning Group.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.